Today I am with Chuck Adams of Coeptis Capital. Coeptis Capital is a boutique investment bank, a strategic advisory firm focusing on manufacturing, industrial, and construction markets. They provide corporate development support to help firms grow through strategic advisory, mergers and acquisitions, or capital raising. Leveraging operational experience, providing tailored solutions for sustained growth. Chuck's passion is to partner with manufacturing-centric firms to help them achieve sustainable growth through corporate development and excellence. Chuck, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Dale. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's I've been looking forward to having you here and to share more about Coeptis Capital. I know you're from the Seattle area initially, and you chose your path when going to Boise State University with your mechanical engineering degree, and then your adventure began even from there. So tell us about Coeptis Capital and the clients you serve.
It's first thing. Coeptis was actually a brainchild of my friend Corbin. We were talking about the naming, and Coeptis is really a Latin offshoot, meaning undertakings, enterprises, right? So we thought it was fitting. And when we started
Very
the
good.
firm, we really wanted to focus on serving manufacturers, industrial companies. We both had a lot of experience in that, and we want to bring that experience when we serve our clients in the capital space. And so we love to work with companies, some funds, family offices, you name it, but mainly companies when it comes to their growth. Full stop. That's it. And that can either be done organically, really helping them with their strategy and really understanding where they can go next.
Mm,
Another way is through buy-side mergers and acquisitions, which is an area we focus, where we help them make good acquisitions, integrate them, and really add value to themselves and to others, and more importantly, their customers. And then the other way too is we like to help companies raise capital, whether it's equity for stock or debt. And we find that a lot of companies, especially in the lower middle market, really struggle right now because over the last 20 or 30 years, this has just been such a hyper focus on either very large deals, institutional deals,
mm,
or deals that are very focused on tech and SaaS. Think venture capital, for example. And so we want to celebrate people that make things and companies that make things and build things, right?
right.
And really help them have somebody in their corner to help on the financial side when needed, but somebody that actually understands because they've been there and done that.
When I first met you, it was at an aerospace manufacturing conference,
Yep.
and it was so funny. I've kind of teased you at times about the fact that I don't know. I get confused with you because you're all about finance, but yet you talk like an aerospace engineer. And
Well, that's funny. Maybe because I was one.
right, right. Well, and that's what was
Uh,
was really interesting about some of the conversations we've had, where you're able to do the corporate development and the in-house understanding with your clients in a way that seems quite unique.
I'd like to think so. It's like one of the things that we always say when we talk about what makes us different, right? Why us? And we always say that we have the operational expertise. And I personally, I was at General Electric, what's now called aerospace. It wasn't called aerospace at the time. It was aviation. And before that, aircraft engines was there for almost 7 years, for example, right? And doing not only the design work, but also going and doing maintainability, MRO, as they call it in that industry, and looking at operations and contracts and how can we do business better and serve our customers, make sure we're maintaining quality. So it's really getting that hands-on experience of really digging into those larger issues that especially OEMs like Boeing, which they have kind of a bad reputation in a way right now, but hopefully it's getting better. And how do we go about delivering the best for our clients at a very operational level? So we pride
Right.
on ourselves in having that experience, and also done rail, automotive, but again, a lot of hands-on of really understanding the markets and the products that these companies are serving in. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. You've talked about your growth. I know when you're at GE, and even before GE, some of the projects you're getting into in at university that really like drew you towards systems thinking. Can you talk to us a bit about really the systems thinking and how that developed for you?
systems thinking, I think it's something that a lot of people take for granted. And when I think
Mm,
back to the development of that thinking and really understanding what I call the big picture, and I really believe a good business leader, especially CEOs, presidents, people like that, really have to have a good understanding of what's going on in all areas of their business, right? Because a business, in my mind, I look at it like it's a living organism. We
right.
talked about this, right? You got to sell, you have all the little pieces in a cell, and I'm not going to try to go back to my biology days. Not that I was ever a biologist by any means. You know what I'm talking about,
Right.
back in high school. But I think about that in college, and I got exposed to a lot of experiences early where having that teamwork and having that mentality of really thinking about the big picture was important. One good example we've talked about in the past was really the video game design. I got picked up to go work on a video game, Math Attack, and work on simulations and really just cool things with the Unity game engine to
Mm,
display educational content to college students and high school students alike. But when you're developing those levels and the AI that goes behind it, and back then the AI was nothing like it was now,
right.
making something go around a wall is actually quite hard to do in code, right? It was really important from a leadership style to really be very collaborative, democratic, but also very
Mm,
innovative because we had to be willing to take risks, but we had to cohesively come together to really think about how the game works at a very systems thinking level. And you're pulling all of that together to make it work. And so
right.
that was really the first time it was really exposed. And I think that really influenced my career overall, even if I was working on a very specialized function for a time or whatnot in
Right.
engineering and beyond. So,
Right. I remember one time you had mentioned a product that was coming into your shop, and instead of just replacing certain things, you would actually get it refurbished. And you're actually not just engineering, but actually making the business case and the financial business case, of course, for actually, refurbishing rather than rebuilding or remaking a part.
I think I was exposed to that a whole bunch, especially at the aerospace and defense level. I think that's what it's alluding to there. And in that particular industry, you got to remember that when you're dealing with things like aircraft or certain machinery, jet engines, going out and just trying to buy a new part like we do in the automotive world a lot, right? And just
Right.
slap it in there. My favorite is when you look at the Chilton manuals, the Haynes manuals, right? And you're like, oh well, if this is
Yep.
bad, just replace it. Well, that's great if it's a $10 part, but what if it's a $10 million part? I mean,
Right.
as an exaggeration. But yes, part of my career was also in the MRO world on multiple engine lines, where it was really about you're getting conditions that aren't addressed in the airworthiness manual for this particular module or
Mm,
part. So,
right.
what do you do about it when you get it out of limits? If the part costs like a fan module costs $2 million, well, that's quite a pill to swallow, even for a behemoth like GE to deal with, right?
Right.
And so there was a lot of time spent where I had to make the business case of really making sure that we were making good repairs, or more importantly, like you said, refurbishing and repairing and getting that back into the field in a usable condition that would obviously meet the quality requirements that the customer needed, but without
Right.
just throwing things necessarily away. Because in that business, especially if you do that, you're going to go out of business real quick if you're on contract.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Well, we like to talk about, living beyond limits and working beyond limits,
Yeah.
and I think about your career and how you moved from very much a manufacturer, very much an engineer, into finance. And
Mm.
it seems that you reinvented yourself, which I think is really important in our careers, but it doesn't seem like you changed your journey. It seems like you were just kind of evolving and growing.
I think you're onto something there for sure. I I actually agree, and we've discussed this because everything I've done up until this point where I'm at now, absolutely, I think it's just been a journey. It's just a matter of
Right.
enhancing it so you would get there, and like you said, reinventing just so that you could keep going down the path that you see in front of you, not necessarily, you know. going 180 because of some other weird thing, right?
Right.
And yeah, and I've taken that journey to build upon and build and build and build to be able to offer something today that I think that is very unique, like we've talked about, that nobody else can really offer. So the
Mm,
journey to finance was an interesting one because originally I wasn't expecting it. And even to this day, I find it very odd to call myself a financier and an investment banker because I
right.
definitely didn't start that way, right? And originally, I got into financing and accounting and understanding the numbers and stocks and just all that stuff,
Right.
right? That comes with that,
Right.
really out of necessity at first in education. When I was at GE, I really wanted to move into something else, I think, in the longer term, not right away, but into the management consulting side. So I went to do my MBA, it was paid for, and just to really remember that systems thinking, just so that I could understand all the
Right.
facets of a business beyond just product development and engineering, something technically. And that's where I kind of fell in love with kind of the consulting advisory stuff that we kind of do now. And
Right.
I got forced to learn accounting really, really, really deeply, but it turned out I wasn't too bad at it. And really it was kind of like engineering in a way, it was just using numbers, right? So good at
Mm,
numbers. So finance, once you understood the fundamentals, it was like, oh, this is easy, right? At least for an
right.
engineer, because it was just, oh, I'm just doing something on a balance sheet or an income statement, not just
Right.
a drawing, right?
Right.
And over time, I had to flex that muscle in actual consulting engagements, but also starting companies and everything, to the point where it was a natural lead in. And once I found that niche in the market, like you said, that specialization of trying to really focus on the manufacturing and helping there financially, it was a no brainer and exciting. So, yeah.
Mm, I know I've heard of others that are very strong in manufacturing, production, but then also that very strong business side. And I don't. It's intriguing. It seems like you don't play. It's like you're not playing just regular chess. You're really playing that multi-level 5D chess. When you're looking at a company and able to look at all the various levels and how the things interrelate, and so when you're looking at finance, you actually have a much more intimate understanding of someone's company.
Yeah, well, I think you said it very well there. 5D chess, maybe six. I don't know, right? But definitely more than 3D chess. And the way I see it is it's taking a bunch of that, like you said, that reinvention and experience and really melding it into something that's beyond
Right.
just finance. So sure, I'm an investment banker. That's fair. But it's more than just investment banking and finance, right? When we're looking at these big problems, we need to look at it as a management consultant, CEO, executive looks at it, right? So we got to look at it
Right.
from that regard. But then we also have to look at it from an internal focus of looking at your products and looking at the operations and saying, is this, and really grading that. So that way, when we work with our clients, it's a very holistic view and not just a balance sheet or just a
Right.
number on a sheet, right? You have to look at
Right.
all those facets. And I think that's what we really offer. That it's not that other investment bankers don't do that per se, but maybe not as intimately as somebody that's actually worked in these industries for a while.
So explain this to me. Maybe give a story of about walking through someone's shop. You're there as an investment banker, but they give you a tour. Manufacturing is famous for tours. So you take your tour through the
Sure.
shop and you're thinking about finances. What's going through your head?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because oddly enough, we had talked about this a little. It's gotten to the point where I almost can like look at the financials, at least in the boardroom, and I
Right.
can already tell that there could be problems out on the floor and vice versa. You'll
Okay.
be walking along, and I'll give an example here in a second where you'll be like, "Oh wow, I bet you that's going to show up this in the financials," and sure enough, it does, right? Because you're like, "What's going on over here?" And so it's funny because I try to compartmentalize, but in a very positive way. Because yes,
Right.
I'm thinking about the finances, but when I go on a shop floor, I don't think, "Oh, let me go start thinking about all these numbers per se." I'm thinking, all right, I'm going onto a shop floor. Let me get my steel-toed boots. Let me get my. Whenever I visit shops, even though I'm a banker, I show up in my blue collar kind of stuff is what I show up in. I really
Right.
do. My own, oh, you got your own safety glasses and earplugs. I'm like, well, yeah. I mean, duh. But I walk out there and I'm looking at it like a shop. Like, is there
Right.
inventory piling up? Do they have clear markings? Is there ways that parts can get mixed up? Watching the people at the machines, how are they operating? Are they, like lean manufacturing, right? Are you being lean? Are there things that they're doing that they're not
Right.
doing? Are there work instructions? Are they having stand-up meetings every day? I just like any other operational person would. And by no means am I an absolute god or something in that. There's a lot of really good people out there that consult in that, but the point is
Absolutely.
going in. But we do that when we're grading a particular target. If it's M&A, I remember going out and doing a recent tour of a shop, and every time I did a couple tours, because we did a couple visits, and every time I go out there, I'd be like asking questions that's very operationally focused. It had nothing
Right.
to do with, well, how much does this cost, or that it was, or how productive is this sell for on a profit. No, it was looking at the fundamentals of going, okay, well, what's your cycle time on this part? How long does it take you to get this? How long do these parts sit here, right?
Right.
You know,
Right.
where's shipping and receiving, and actually kind of following the part, hopefully backwards through the shop, so you can kind of see how things are being value added to that part over time, right?
Right.
And are they using ERPs? Are they using computers? Is it paper routers? I mean, those are the questions I ask when I walk through a shop. It's not always about the finances, but obviously as I'm doing all that, I'm kind of stashing it in my subconscious, so that obviously when I get back and I really meditate and I'm like, okay, well, how does that translate between everything we see in the business, including the
Right.
finances? Hopefully that answers your
Right.
question. But I mean, I walk into a shop and I have many examples, and it's just because I'm an investment banker doesn't mean I don't look at it on it with an industry person's eyes, hopefully.
Right.
So
Well, and I wonder about, when you're buying materials and a manufacturer will buy materials fairly far out sometimes, just building get bulk pricing and the kind of pricing they really need to do a job. And then that's got to go through the system eventually. And then that's
yeah,
got to get paid for or delivered to the customer and then paid for, of course. That can be a long time in the
yeah.
course of things. And how do you think about
Mhm.
that? And when you're looking at materials and you're looking at, what they're producing and timelines?
That's a great question. I call that the working capital cycle, which is what most financiers call it too, right?
Right.
And I will tell you, the way I look at it is I look at those things like a burn rate, right? And I mean, I have a startup, right? I get it. You really have to
Okay.
look at it that way, but you also have to look at when you're taking on projects, what is your cycle going to be on that revenue? This is something that doesn't really elude a lot of the larger companies, especially the GE and Jack Welch era companies, because they had gotten
Mm,
so organizationally controlling, which has its own bad things. That's a different discussion. But they at least were able to understand, what's my inventory turnover? How long does it take me to acquire sales? When you're working in a lower middle market company and Main Street company, and you're a $3 million shop of revenue, sometimes that kind of eludes them a little bit, or it's not quite so obvious every once in a while to some of them.
right.
And so what's really important, and what I
Mm,
always do, is I always look at the financials and talk to the shop owners and stuff, right? Or whoever we're talking to at that
right.
time, to make sure that we really have a good understanding of their working capital requirements. If you got to buy inventory a month in advance, like you said, or in bulk, right? How long is it going to take before you're going to be able to cogs that bad boy? I know that sounds really cheesy, but cogs it and be able to actually get
Right.
revenue on that product. So that way you can pay for the things that you're paying for now, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
but hopefully that kind of digs into that. Is I really do wish manufacturers would really, especially the smaller ones, it really pays to have somebody in your corner kind of do a quick working capital understanding and really
Right.
understand what that cycle is. Some accountants do it okay, but most CPAs and stuff are there to do your taxes. They're not there to really leverage your financial function as a weapon, which I think is important. But and of
Mm,
course, all you really need a good CFO kind of function. You need a good CTO. You need somebody that understands the IT and the tech. You need somebody
Right.
that understands the sales. All of that is important, that systems thinking, to really make a
Right.
successful shop and a successful business. So yeah.
No, that's really good.
Mhm.
Well, so I'm wondering about how does the financial world deal with those long runs? If your banker doesn't have the depth of understanding to understand the values that are involved, and they could have sales stacking up and they're saying, well, we need some financing to just deal with cash flow. We've got sales in the works. We've got actually materials in the warehouse. We just need something to keep us moving here through the cycle so that they can, get the jobs done. And so my question is like, um, how are the manufacturers doing? And we're talking about low to mid market, right? Manufacturers trying to, how are they doing with getting the financing that they need and the funding they need to keep the doors open without it being really stressful?
Yeah. What I've found, especially in the lower middle market, Main Street, those kind of companies, your $10 million revenue company is a great example. I'm finding that they are really struggling right now. We talked about this where
Right.
there's a really good ecosystem supporting startups in the form of venture capital and angel investors to some extent. Yes, you do have your legacy banks, you go down the street and go, hey, can I get a loan or can I get a line of credit?
Right.
But now with the tightening of interest rates, especially recently, people need to understand, especially manufacturers, that banks can only do so much, right? They can only take so much risk. And most of the time, unless you have a working capital need that's easily quantified, or you could at least clearly show that for a line of credit, or you have a way of being able to collateralize things,
Right.
right? If you want equipment and stuff, unless you can do some simpler things like that, it can be really tricky and hard to get financing. And I really
Mm,
feel for a lot of manufacturers because I hear horror stories about really good, and usually they're good kind of horror stories. And what I mean by that is like, hey, I have this customer that really wants to do this with me. I need $20 million of capital, but I know my bank, there's no way on earth they're going to give me that, all
mm,
that at least. So how am I going to close that gap, right? It's really difficult from what I've seen. I mean, every space is different, right? Everybody has their own experience, but what we found is just that there's a big need of institutional investment capital in the
right.
lower middle market. And I think there's some really good opportunities. I've had a couple cross my desk in the last month where
Mm,
there's really good growth prospects, which I know we'll talk about regarding nearshoring, reshoring, and really bringing manufacturing back in the United States. Great opportunities are starting to show up. The problem is that there's just not a lot of investor capital in a way that is really geared toward that growth equity or that investment where
right.
maybe the ownership doesn't want to give up 50% plus of the business. Maybe they just need $10 million of equity. And it's really difficult to find those investors. You have to overturn a lot of rocks. And
Mm,
I think I think that kind of alludes to the point where I'm kind of blaring the trumpet of like, look, we're starting all this reshoring. I don't care what administration is going to take over. There's a
right.
lot of good incentives to go ahead and reshore, and investors, you should really consider this. Let's build an ecosystem to support the manufacturers and let them grow again.
Right.
Uh,
Right. So finance is a big deal right now.
yeah.
There's so much talk about the reshoring, et cetera. And I've found it a little concerning with the conversations we've had that there seems to be that lack. It doesn't seem that there's a specialty or expertise and understanding manufacturing so that the financiers will, kind of grease the skids for the manufacturers to keep things moving smoothly. The thing I get concerned with is in hearing about the difficulties with attaining the right or acquiring the right kind of capital is that people make decisions based on the resources they have access to. And
Hmm.
so are the lower to middle tier manufacturers able to make the best decisions when they don't have access to the resources that they really need.
That's a really good point, Dale. I would say that is a big common theme, especially in lower middle market and Main Street manufacturing. Your mom and pop shop down the road. For many, many years, if you wanted a loan or you need some money and to get working capital, where would you go? You'd go to your local banker. I mean,
Right.
financial
Right.
banker at least, right?
Right.
That's what you did. And don't get me wrong, those are still a linchpin in the economy, and we need them.
Very
I mean, you
much.
still need depository services, and they are institutional, and they can underwrite some loans that can really help manufacturers grow. Do not get me wrong, and they're very important, and we have great relationships with them, right?
You bet.
But you have to remember, and I think this is what some manufacturers don't quite understand, is I think it's a lack of access and even just education. That banks are financial institutions. They have certain rules they have to play by. There's certain investments that they're just not going to make because they just can't, right?
Right. Right.
Especially if you're a manufacturer that is maybe a little distressed. Maybe it's a special situation, or it's a special business model that just might not make sense and they just don't want to take the risk, right?
Right.
And so one of our jobs that we've had is we've been wanting to more and more educate. I've had so many people tell me this, including you, is like, Chuck, like, what you're saying makes total sense. But the truth is there's a lot of manufacturers out there that just don't even know about this or really understand this, that there are
Right.
alternatives to your local bank. There is private credit facilities. There are private equity funds, family offices that are willing to do, and those are just a
Right.
couple, but that are willing to help you in a way that's much more customized and better for what you really need. So instead of leveraging a bunch of debt and having to deal with the interest payments or refinancing and all that, right? And there's a risk there. Maybe it might make sense to take on some equity capital, give up 20% of the business. So I think you've touched on something really good there to summarize. I think it's an education and an awareness that, especially when you get to a certain size, there are other resources outside of just your local bank.
Right. Okay. Well, Chuck, this is really interesting. I've always appreciated your passion for going after the wicked problems. And
Mhm.
I think we're going to have a lot more interesting conversations about that. But for now, let's talk about just what exactly is an investment banker.
When people think of investment bankers, what do most people think of? They think of suits and ties and being up in the high rises in New York City or Chicago or wherever, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask you
And
where your tie was today.
yeah, you're gonna notice I'm not your typical, I don't know, bulge bracket investment banker, that's for sure. But the point is an investment banker, a lot of people have this image of that, right? That tie, that suit, and don't get me wrong, I
Right.
wear that. Don't worry. but a lot of people think of things like IPOs, for example, initial public offerings. Hey, Facebook's going public. Well, they got to work with somebody, right? They usually work with an investment bank. An investment banker is really just somebody that helps facilitate investment of some way, shape, or form in a nutshell. So typically, investors will help companies or funds or other vehicles of that nature either raise money from investors, or they'll help them with restructuring a company, or the other big one is mergers and acquisitions. So facilitating or advising on how to go about doing that.
Right.
Now, what's the difference between your local stockbroker and an investment banker? That one comes up a lot
Hmm.
because we're technically licensed by FINRA. We're all under the same umbrella, and I actually have my Series 7, which is a kind of like a general securities. It's basically what you would call a stockbroker, but they're different,
Right.
right? Your local stockbroker is really somebody that obviously works in buying and selling stock, bonds, and all that, but that's the key words. They typically work in maybe suggesting buying or selling existing stocks or bonds, right? Does that make sense? Or
Right.
they can also be a placement agent, which means they could pitch an offering through a private placement or other ways. I won't get into that. that stuff. But that's kind of what they do, is they're kind of the salesman in a way. But
Right.
what an investment banker does is they help underwrite. They help do the math and structure the offering or structure a
Mm,
transaction. So they got to do a lot of the structuring behind the scenes, help with the marketing materials to give to those stockbrokers to pitch, if that makes sense. I mean, that's what an investment banker does. Now, I'm glad that we're talking about that, because there's a lot of myths around an investment banker and what they do and who they serve. Traditionally, investment bankers have served a lot of the large companies. Don't get
right.
me wrong, right? Because they had the economies to do that. But with the digital age, in this day and age, especially, there is a huge need, like we talked about in manufacturing, for example, right? Of investor capital to help these wonderful companies grow that have something special with them. There is more and more introduction of investment bankers working in what we call the lower middle market, like me,
Right.
where we're not necessarily working with Ford Motor Company. Why?
Right.
You got Goldman Sachs and all these other people dealing with all that, right? But what about the little guy, right? What about the $10 million company that has a sweet project or a sweet, new product line that they want to put in
Right.
their shop, and they can't quite get enough capital to go make it happen? That's where an investment banker like me could kind of help come in, help structure the offering, make sure the company is ready for that. But more importantly, then go out to the right investors that are going to root for you, maybe even add value to you to help you get that capital and grow. So that's really what an investment banker does, is work in the capital markets to help facilitate, advise, market,
Mm,
and really help people raise money, or like I said, do restructurings. A bankruptcy, investment bankers will get involved in that sometimes, and perform mergers and acquisitions and advise on how to best do that, if that makes
right.
sense. So yeah,
Right.
that's what they do.
Right. Well, and it seems that, and I would think this is probably what drew you to it, is you're able to really reach into every really nook and cranny of any company.
Oh yeah, part of doing any transaction, whether you're raising capital, whether you're doing a merger and acquisition, and we, like I said, specialize really on the buy side for M&A. That's where we like to play.
Right.
We're helping other companies, especially corporate strategic buyers, $100 million companies, go acquire other companies in the lower to middle market.
Right.
And when you're doing that, due diligence is the famous, due diligence comes up a lot. And that's what you're overturning every aspect of that company, that systems thinking we talked about. It's about looking at not only just the financial due diligence of what do the books look like? Are they clean? Hiring accountants to go look at it and do quality of earnings. But you're also overturning the commercial aspects, that strategy, right? And your product
Right.
lines. What are they really going after? What's their commercial viability as a business? Are they a job shop that's just churning aluminum parts? Or they got some secret sauce that they can really leverage to grow,
Right.
right? Then there's other
Right.
areas to consider, and I'll slow down on that, but management and human resources. Do you have a good management team? Are they going to be looking for the door? Are they looking to exit? Are they going to stay? Do they have a criminal background? I know that's very boilerplate stuff, but those are very
Right.
important questions that you, as an investor, when working with, maybe investing through an investment banker, you know what I mean, and looking at that you have to ask yourself those questions, or buying a company. Other areas is now an increasing one, which I think your listeners should really be attuned to, is technology and IT. Cybersecurity is becoming a bigger thing, especially if you're in the aerospace and
Mm,
defense and the defense
right.
contract stuff, CMMC. That's becoming a
Right.
huge area of due diligence. And then, last but not least, there's other areas such as operational. I mean, are they even operating well? Are there risks associated in operations? And are they not maintaining their machines? You know what I mean? You don't always see that from the balance
Sure.
sheet or from the income statement. So it's
Sure.
overturning all those rocks. So investment banking really touches all of that when you're doing M&A, especially, even if you're on the sell side, because you really have to understand what the prospects of that company are,
Right.
no matter what side of the aisle you sit on.
Hey, Chuck, so are you available to actually, go into the field and do a working capital analysis for the manufacturers that are out there?
Yeah, we typically do it as just kind of an add-on value that when we're working with them strategically. Always do it obviously on all of our targets where at least we either A, look at theirs and kind of validate internally if they're doing that, or B,
Right.
a lot of the smaller manufacturers, they don't have anything even formal where we're taking a look at the working capital and it looks like you need about this money to really stay afloat, right?
Right.
So we'll go out and do that for sure, but usually it's a deeper discussion beyond just the finances. It's just making sure that
Right.
strategically they're really good. And obviously a key area of that is how are they doing on the financial side of it? And
Well,
do they really need a deeper understanding of that? So
well, and
yeah,
I'm intrigued with that because I would think that smaller firms, they're in grow mode. They're a few years old or maybe older, um, but they're lean enough to where we're working hard, we're making good sales, et cetera.
yeah,
But they're not at that level where they have a full executive staff.
yeah.
And so I wonder, it's like, what is the opportunity or the advantage for a smaller firm to have you come in and do an analysis, just to step in, even if it's a yearly check-in and checkup?
I think there would be a lot of value there. And remember, it takes a team to get anything done in life. I really do believe that, especially
You
for
bet.
companies. So, like for me, I have no problem at least having the conversation and digging into the numbers to get a good first understanding for sure. I think that's important to do that checkup. What's even more important, I think, as an investment banker, is that investment banker has a bunch of other partners and referrals that they can make. I think a good, I think just a good consultant in general, let alone advisor and investment banker, has a Rolodex of the right people so that when I walk into a
Mm,
manufacturer, if we spot a particular problem, especially if it's not my specific area of expertise, I at least know the right person that they should go talk to, even if that doesn't, even if that means not me for the next 6 months and not my pocketbook. Does that make
right.
sense?
Right.
Especially if oh, I need a better, more robust FP&A. Well, I can at least have a discussion with you to kind of get you a quick idea. But if you really want to systemize it and make it as part of your DNA, let's work with a partner, a
Right.
fractional CFO, right? Or I always
Right.
give now CFO props or executive allies here in Boise, right? Like they can help you be that fractional person that doesn't break the bank, but at least gives you line of sight on the financial side and
Right.
everything else in between for all the other stuff we discussed. But I think it's very good to do that. And to sum this up, I would say that where I find a lot of small manufacturers get into trouble is when they want to say yes to something, but they don't know what that means everywhere else in the business. So,
Right.
oh, we just sold $20 million for the next year of this thing, or product to this company or whatever, right? That's a good problem to have. Do not get me wrong, Dale. But
Yep.
okay, but have you really thought through very quickly how that changes your working capital requirements?
Right.
How does that change your operational flow? Do you have the capacity to do that? I think most people, especially if they're a startup and they start it themselves, they kind of have a gut feeling there. Don't, I think they kind of
Right.
do. Some people do have a good handle on that. But I've also found that usually they'll favor one area of the business they can get a good gut feel for at the expense of the other. So, like one guy
Mm,
I knew, he was a really good machinist, for example. He could really understand the capacity and he had a good gut feel for that on the machining side. But then when it came to the finances, totally
right.
like I told you, you're a cell, you're a living organism as a business, and you got to make sure that when you're accepting orders and doing things, you got to know what the left and the right hand are doing, right? You got to understand
Right.
what specific needs those tentacles of your business are going to need, because you accept that $20 million order, but you got to put down $1 million a month, right? I'm just making something up, but
Right.
of capital, and you don't have that in the bank. Well, that's not good. You're not going to be able to fulfill it. So
Well, and I think what's interesting is the idea of the team and strategic partners. And I know you've worked for years to build relationships with strategic partners, and
yeah,
so you can actually provide a solution, and how to stay in your lane, and you know how
Yeah.
to bring a partner in to do this other work. I mean, you have enough work to keep you busy for however long. So it's not like you're needing to do these projects that are outside of your lane. And so that being said, it's like what's your experience there and being able to bring in, I mean, sometimes what do you have, two or three firms
Yeah.
collaborating to bring in expertise and a solution?
Yeah. So think about M&A, for example. We tell our clients right up front, look, if you're going to go make an acquisition, I am your investment banker, your partner, your core dev advisor, kind of all that, right? Wrapped in one. And to really work with you, executive, board to board, CEO to, I'm here for you, right? Or your CFO, you get it, right?
Right.
And when it comes to doing M&A, we approach it as, look, I am your drill sergeant and kind of your program manager in this aspect, right? So we can overview and work to help make sure this gets done and we have a successful transaction and hopefully an integration, right? And we'll bring in the right partners as needed on that. However, when we start an engagement, we make it very clear when we put proposals together and we educate our clients, look, when you get further down the road beyond just finding targets,
Right.
and you start putting together things like LOIs and the fancy documents, we need to start bringing in some other partners. So some two key partners always in a deal with somebody like us is we're going to need to find the right M&A attorney, legal advice, right? Because
Mm,
I'm not a lawyer, swim lanes, right? And you want to work with a good M&A lawyer that has some experience or has at least that training to be able to do that kind of stuff because it's a very specialized thing.
right.
And I always tell my clients, I know you got a lawyer, a general counsel you might go to or whatever, but there's a very good chance they are not an M&A lawyer. It's a very specialized function.
Right.
So we're going to have to hire, just so you know, we're going to have to work and you're going to have to pay for it. But I am going to work with them like we're on a team
Right.
and go back and forth so that I have that team member. So then that way we can talk about the deal terms and everything, right? So you need a lawyer
Very good.
for purchase agreements, you know what I mean, disclosure statements, and then they're going to be going back and forth possibly with their legal counsel. The other one we always suggest too is you want like an accounting firm on board as well. Now, obviously, I have a good level of accounting. Don't get me wrong, Dale, but I am no CPA accountant, and I don't claim to be. And some bankers are. I am not one of those. But it's always good, not because I don't have a financial understanding and I can't read the numbers and obviously do strategically do due diligence there. But what about digging into the chart of accounts and digging into the records, the transactions,
Right.
and really understanding where money is flowing? Is it compliant with GAAP? And really that deep technical kind of accounting. I always say be ready to bring in a quality of earnings provider. And a quality of earnings is kind of like an audit, like an accounting audit,
Right.
but it's more than that. It's looking forward and going, how sustainable is this given how they do their accounting and their practices, right?
Right.
And we have a couple of good partners too. And I mean, I know this is about us and everything, but like Hemming Morris and Ethan and that team and Tim Boblob, they're great. So those are great partners to have and bring on when you do stuff like that.
Nice.
Yeah, capital raise is no different. Is no different. You need to have a legal team to work with your banker to really make sure that you're drawing them up in guidance with the law and the state law and all that.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Well, I'm kind of thinking back to your talks about systems thinking when you're early on, when you're in engineering school,
Hmm.
and and even getting into engineering and manufacturing at GE and such. And but thinking about that, you were very comfortable with speaking with boards and decision makers and wanting to push yourself up to or bring yourself up to a level where you could go after more systemic, or would you call it systemic or systematic? No, it's systemic. Okay. Where you wanted to actually have your hands more on wicked systemic issues, um, and be able to work with decision makers that could actually really refine excellence within a company. And
Hmm.
I thought that was very interesting. And to see where you're at now, where you're not just working with a board, but you're actually building ad hoc teams. I don't know if ad hoc's the best word for that, but you're bringing together teams that can come in and best serve a client for their
Yeah.
firm to be able to get the services they need so that when they move through this stage of their development and their growth, they're really strong and prepared for the next stage. If you're growing from 10 to 20 million a year, it's like, those have got to be some interesting problems. And but to actually have the financial side, and not just the financial side, but your system side, all
Yeah.
of your systems actually growing together. I think it's fascinating to see a team that can collaborate when they're running various departments, and they're all growing, and they're having to like grow together.
Yeah.
And nobody's the king in charge, really. It's like, we made another big sale. What are we going to do now? It's like, we're all going to step up is what we're going to do. And we're all going to do our jobs, and we all have to grow. And talk
Mhm.
about beyond limits, these small manufacturers that are growing and growing and growing. How many stages do they go through? Holy cow. And then what are the systems in place when it comes to the finance, and being able to collaborate throughout the company, not just, do we make payroll?
Yeah, I would give 2 points to that. The first one is, even before we do a capital raise or an M&A, right, or anything of that nature, strategic advisory, the first thing we always do is we sit down and we look at the company. There's a lot of
Mm,
names people give it to. I mean, but I kind of call it just a business snapshot, an enterprise memo, right?
right.
Where are you at? Let's look internally at the company. How are you behaving? Do you have, entrepreneur operating system, if that's how you want to do your planning and your executive management, and your company management? Are you using Hoshin Conry or whatever you want to call it, or whatever techniques you want to use? That's fine. But are you ready to row the right direction together? That's the
Right.
first thing.
Right.
Because the analogy that I use, I mean, coming from my construction stuff, right, too, right, which we haven't talked much about yet, but I always think of, like, the show Hoarders, for
Right.
example.
Right.
You got this house, it's full of all this stuff and all this garbage and waste or whatever, right? And if you're not careful and you want to go do, for example, an M&A, or even capital raise to go do that, or whatever it is, why would you go add to the mess? Like, oh, I need more room in my house, so let me
Mm,
go build an addition to the house.
right.
But wait a minute. Instead of you being really, trying to build an addition and then just go fill that with a bunch of other garbage and overflow to it, how about you focus internally first to make sure that you got your internal operations at least somewhat managed, right?
Right. Right.
And at least those risks mitigated before you go start adding a bunch of other targets or, additions to your house, right?
Right. Right.
And, growth for the sake of growth, I call it. I would say that people are getting better about not doing that, but I still see it. And that's the first thing I would say, is make sure you're rowing in the right direction and management's on board. So you touched on that very well. The second thing I would say too, and this came up in Toastmasters, which I'm a member of and lead a club
Right.
and everything, different positions in different stages of a company require different leadership styles.
Mm,
And different teams require different leadership styles and leaders. And I was just talking about this the other night with somebody. A plugin I would say is Barbarians to Bureaucrats by Lawrence Miller. Great book if you haven't read it. But he talks about this exact issue, is as you grow as a company, the way that those companies tend to grow and who needs to fill those seats changes sometimes. Or
right.
you as a person need to change how you lead, right? Are you going to be much more bureaucratic and authoritative at the beginning and just tell people what to do like a barbarian? Or are you going to have to start realizing that as you add executives to your team, there has to be a little bit more democratic and kind of a, I wouldn't say completely consensus, but you know what I mean? Working
Right.
together to make sure all the
Right.
systems of the business are functioning properly, right? I know I'm drowning on here, but it's really important. What my title of that speech was it's important to have the right leaders or right leadership styles in the right places at the right time. And so before you go do these major corporate actions, right? Whether entering a new market, buying a company, raising capital from investors,
Right.
make sure you have the right people in the right seats at the right time. Absolutely.
I mean, it's a gift of leadership, of being able to actually um, work with leaders, lead leaders. And I've
Hmm.
I've seen leaders that they're great with a minimum wage employee, but when it came to really raising up leaders and building leaders and working with leaders, they somehow there's a mental shift where they aren't able to get there.
Yeah, I would say the way I put it, because that's a very good point. Good leaders will begot more leaders, right? Or
Right.
you know,
Right.
spur more leaders. Maybe it's not begot or whatever, not begotten, but they'll spur other followers to become leaders. And I mention that because you're right. I would find it like, because I've been doing management consulting, investment banking and stuff for years now. One of the biggest challenges, I believe, is it's influencing people and helping make better leaders from leaders, or make leaders better at what they do,
Mm,
when you don't have authoritative control over them, right? Some
right.
people love authority and bureaucracy, and they just, like you said, the minimum wage. Hey, go do this thing, and that's just what they want to do, and they want to be in charge, right?
Right.
But it takes somebody special when you have to advise and you have to tell people, because it's not like I can go to my clients and go, hey, do this, right? Or else I don't have any. I mean, they hired me, right?
Right.
Like, they're paying me, but they're paying me to advise them. And I
Right.
need to make sure that when I'm advising them, like, hey, look, like, you're not doing it obviously like in a bureaucratic way, but you have to be able to influence those leaders, and they have to be able to influence each other and listen to each other
Right.
in a much different way than just making commands down to the bottom, right? It's
Right.
different, and it takes a special skill set, and I think it takes also a special emotional intelligence to do that, because you got to consider all of their motivations, and trying to influence somebody that you don't have direct control over can be challenging. And yeah, it's important. So
Well, that's really
yeah.
good. Considering that we're living in an era, what do they call that? VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So we're living in this really VUCA, the era of VUCA. Disruptions are everywhere in business, especially in finance and et cetera. So how do you bring that all together? And what are some of the concerns and the things that come to mind right now after spending this time talking, especially when we consider that we have such robust institutions that have served really business very, very well in the 20th century. But it's the 21st century. Where do we go from here?
Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily the fact of what you come up with, innovative or not. I think it's about the behavior of how you go about doing it, right? So let me elaborate on that, what I mean. You're right. It's a very VUCA world out there. Disruptive. AI has been rising, right? And it's disrupting sectors that we both really care about, right? I mean, investment
Yeah.
banking is one of them, but where we really like to care is manufacturing, industrials, right? An industry that typically shied away from really catching up with technology for a long time, right? And now with the rise of China, and all the disruption, the VUCA that's happening in that world, there's really a renewed focus on the industry 4.0 and the disruption there. There's always going to be competition. There's always going to be new innovations and things coming out, right? And so going from there, when you're a company and you're pursuing, your means of business, right? I think what you have to remind yourself is that you got to always keep your head on a swivel and always be
Mm,
looking to improve and innovate in what you do. Sure, making lasering out a sheet with a laser, for example. I mean, it's the physical world. It's lasering. That's fair, right?
right.
But there will always be ways to improve. I truly believe that, whether that's on the floor or it's in the back office. And there will always be ways that we can do new things or the same things better, right? And so what I would encourage people to do, and I look at this in my business too very often, is that you have to keep up with the times and kind of understand what's happening out there, whether it's yourself trying to innovate or your competitors, right?
Right.
How can we do this better? Uh, I think it was either Bill Gates or somebody else that said it, is that you tend to underestimate, or you overestimate what you can do in 1 year, but you tend to underestimate what you can do in 10 years,
Right.
right?
Right.
I think that's applicable here too, as a encouragement as well, because what I'm not saying is, do you need to think about the latest RFID chips in manufacturing shops and make sure you got the best solution tomorrow, or else you're going to die? Like your business? No, I'm not saying that, right? But at the same time, you as a business owner, executive, wherever you're playing, investment banker, have to make sure that you're always thinking about and making that almost a core value of yours, continuous improvement. How can I get better? Is there a better way of doing this? Looking
Right.
out, are there innovations coming down the pipeline that I can leverage to really transform how to create better value for my clients and customers? That's what it's
Right.
really about.
Right.
And innovation, remember, innovation, and I'd have to look up the technical definition. It's really about leveraging what's coming out. It's never necessarily about, I need to develop this new far-fangled dark matter thing, right? No, sometimes the best innovations are when you take something that's being developed for something and you go, well, wait a minute, what if we did it this way, right?
Right.
And apply it somewhere
Right.
else. I mean, think about like sticky notes with the 3M, right? He's trying to develop a strong glue or whatever it was, but he found out that it worked really great if you wanted to post notes everywhere. I mean,
Right.
it's wonderful. That's innovation, right? And it was just about paying attention and thinking outside the box. So yes, it's a
Mm.
VUCA world out there. It's disruptive. It will pass you by if you are not paying attention, no matter what industry
Right.
you're in. Pay attention and think about how you can improve your offerings. With that said, though, you know, if you do a good enough thinking one day, be done and go home, eat, right? It's not going to
Right.
pass you by that fast, but
Right.
don't let it slide. So that's my
Right.
thoughts.
Right. Well, and I think it's really the time. It's an era of living beyond the limits and
Yeah.
choosing the future. What are we building? What do things look like? By 2050, what's the world going to look like? And my piece of the world, what's that going to look like? And what's my contribution in that? And I got to say, Chuck, I've always appreciated your passion around manufacturing and how there's so much going on with software,
Yeah.
but software has no home without manufacturing. And every piece of software needs to have something built for it, and
Yeah.
it's all dependent upon hardware.
I always say, yeah, the metaphysical or like the technology, the SaaS, that is fully, whether we like it or not. And somebody else on LinkedIn was just saying that today, oddly enough. It is subservient to the physical world, whether you like it or not, right?
Right.
It has to manifest itself in some way, shape, or form. That doesn't mean it's not valuable or it shouldn't be invested in or we shouldn't pursue it or innovate. Quite far from that.
Right.
But again, it's become this, it's almost like idolatry and putting it on this pedestal where people are pursuing that so much on the startup scene just because it could possibly scale faster than hardware.
Right.
And it's like, well, that's because hardware's hard. No pun intended. It's hard to build stuff at
Right.
scale. But I would say the solution, is really, like I said, really focusing on everything, including manufacturing, and having a mindset and living without limits. And instead of us saying, I can't do that, or that's going to be almost impossible. Oh, I don't know. How can we do that? That's the
Right.
mindset you should have to have.
Right.
Like, obviously, I'm not saying, tomorrow we can, well, how are we going to do it? And we're going to vaporize and start being like a transporter in Star Trek. That's going to take time. But we have to open ourselves up to the possibilities of innovation that are going to come our way. And we need to have a mindset of, well, how could we do that? What could we do with this? Instead of always having a closed mind about
Right.
new things and how we do things. So, yeah.
Right. Well, and we've had success. That's one of the things I brought up in one of my little expressions around beyond limits, living without limits, is that sometimes our past success holds us down from future successes,
Hmm.
and sometimes it's like, well, I've done really well here, and we camp there, but I mean, you stop and think about graduating from high school. That was great, and you got memories. You will never go back there. And you only start doing reunions after 10 years, and you do a reunion every 10 years because you're not going back. No one's
Yeah.
going back. It's just a hello, and it's a remembering. That's all it is, but it's the idea that we have to keep moving forward. And it's not that we have to drag ourselves into the later years as much as it's like we have a very exciting time that we live in. Let's go participate. And there's so much genius um, that I think, we can get to the bottom of some of these wicked problems, maybe in ways that, we haven't thought of in the past.
Yeah. The way I say it, and I kind of tie it in with my, Christian faith, and thinking about, in many ways, we want to look to the future, and, we have to be excited for that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we also, I think that kind of alludes to the Bill Gates quote, right? Or assuming that's what he said, that of, you have to kind of also embrace what you're doing right now and enjoy today,
Yeah.
right? Live today. There are innovations coming. We don't know, you could get hit by a car tomorrow, if I'm going to be crude, right? but at the same time, live today. What can we do
Right.
today? And that's good enough. Yes, reflect on the past, like you're talking about, and have fond memories of that, but move forward and look today and kind of look into the future. That's all you can
Right.
do.
Right.
So
Stretch and grow, and maybe meet people that you've never met before. Go fly somewhere, take a trip in a place that you just close your eyes and point on the map, and
oh yeah.
just don't live such a predictable life that we end up just living out of patterns rather than growth.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an odd dichotomy, right? Because on one end, one of the features of really going far in life that I've seen by looking at great business leaders and talking to mentors and stuff is there is something about having a pattern. Don't get me wrong. But I
Oh,
think
yeah.
the better word, there is maybe disciplines, or doing certain things every day to help you get to where you want to go, right? The
Right.
improving the 1% per day
Right.
paradox, right? But at the same time, that then molds into that other side of, no, it's good to be uncomfortable and make
Right.
conscious decisions to do things you haven't done before, right? And
Right.
so to better yourself, it's like, on one end, yes, discipline and regularity can free you, right? As
Absolutely.
long as you're making it work for you to help you get to where you want to go. And again, throw in a little bit of creativity and adventure in there, right? Yeah,
You
that
bet.
sounds good. I'm gonna get a globe out and do that, and my wife is gonna be like, "Good luck with that." I'm not going. Oh, we're going to Mali today. Nope. So I
Good
don't
luck
know.
with that one.
I caught the travel bug when I went to India once. That was years ago, and ever since then, I'm like, "Oh, honey," because she'd gone to Canada. I'm like, that doesn't count. No offense to Canadians, that's just kind of America light, like.
Right.
But you go to, Singapore or Taiwan or, Brazil. Oh, totally
Right.
different, but yet totally worth. And all the friends that I met there and I still communicate with, it's great. So
Right. Right. Gives you a different flavor. Well,
oh yeah.
Chuck, it has been a pleasure. It always is. And I appreciate your insights about this remarkable time that we live. And again, I just want to acknowledge your passion and your commitment to manufacturers, the backbone of American business.
Hmm.
And Chuck, it's so good to have you here.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully next time. There we go.
All right. We'll see you again soon. All right,
See ya.
everybody. You'll be hearing more from Chuck in the future, I'm quite sure. And I hope you enjoyed our time talking about how to live beyond limits.